Good morning, students. Hello, Abhiram. Good morning. Right. So, we had to now talk about the provincial elections of 1937. Right. Uh, as we had discussed in our previous lecture, the Congress had engaged in a strategic debate within itself regarding the strategy to be adopted following the withdrawal of the civil disobedience movement. And as a result of that debate, it had elected or it had chosen to participate in the provincial elections of 1937, which were to be organized under the framework of the 1935 Government of India Act, which provided for the creation of of autonomous governments in the provinces. Right. So that means entirely responsible governments in the provinces. The provincial elections were to be organized in the 11 British Indian provinces, which we have already discussed. Namely, Assam and Bengal. These were the two Muslim majority provinces in eastern India. Punjab, Sindh, and the northwestern frontier province. These were the three Muslim majority provinces in western India, and six Hindu majority provinces, namely UP, United Provinces, CP, Central Provinces, Bihar, the newly created province of Odisha, Madras, and Bombay. Right? So you can write a short introduction with the heading Provincial Elections 1937, and under that write under the framework created by the Government of India Act 1935, under the framework created by the Government of India Act 1935, comma, provincial elections were held in 11 British Indian provinces in 1937. Full stop. These were you can divide them into three groups. A Eastern Muslim majority provinces of Assam and Bengal. B Western Muslim majority provinces of Sindh, Punjab, and NWFP. Western Muslim majority provinces of Punjab, Sindh, and NWFP. And C Hindu majority provinces, that is UP, CP, Bihar, Odisha, Madras, and Bombay. Right? Next main point, or you can give a subheading: parties or contestants. Parties or contestants. First of all, the Indian National Congress. Write down. It campaigned in all provinces. In all provinces. Full stop. Next point. It contested the elections in ordinary or in general, comma, special, comma, reserved, as well as separate electorate constituencies. Right? So it did not forego the elections in any type of constituency or any province, irrespective of whether it had a large scale ground presence in all provinces or not, especially in the Muslim majority provinces. Right? Next point, its manifesto promised radical transformations, including abolition of zamindari, tenancy reform, debt relief, and reform of money lending, upliftment of Harijans and women, workers' reforms, including job security, higher wages, and the right to form unions, comma, release of political prisoners, ending of the police state established by the British, ending of the police state established by the British, etc. Right? So it promised radical changes, radical reforms. All right. Next, likho. The All India Muslim League contested primarily in Muslim majority provinces, focusing upon separate electorate and reserved constituencies. It promised to protect the religious freedoms and rights of Muslims and to protect Muslim interests from, within quotes, Hindu tyranny. Hindu tyranny. Next, the All India Hindu Mahasabha, it contested the elections throughout the country and promised to use the state apparatus to promote Hindu culture, oppose British rule, and to defeat the politics of appeasement. ठीक है. Next, Justice Party. It campaigned in Madras exclusively and promised to protect the interests of non-Brahmins against the Congresses pro-Brahmin politics. It also promised more reservation and jobs for non-Brahmins. Lastly, crucially, it promised to defend the large non-Brahmin businesses and landlords against the Congress's radical agenda. Next लिखो, Dr. Ambedkar and the Liberal Party it campaigned primarily in the Marathi speaking regions of the Bombay province. Marathi speaking regions of the Bombay province. Next point. It promised to end untouchability and uplift the depressed classes through structural reforms. It accused the Congress of diluting the Dalit movement with its Harijan program. So Dr. Ambedkar said that the Harijan program was designed to deflate the organic Dalit movement which was emerging in various parts of India. It called for a radical confrontation with the discriminatory caste system and a complete rejection of that system. However, the Congress did not want a direct confrontation between the upper and the lower castes, and therefore it had introduced the Harijan program, which was mere window dressing. It called upon the upper castes to treat the lower castes more kindly and to bring about a transformation in the eyes or in the attitude of the upper castes towards the lower castes, right? So this was done in order to reduce the radicalism of the caste movement which was emerging, and thus Dr. Ambedkar was against it. Next likho. Other regional parties such as the Sindh United Party of Khwaja Abdullah Harun, comma, the Unionist Party in Punjab of Sikandar Hayat Khan and the Krishak Praja Party of Bengal of Fazlul Haq contested in their respective provinces. Contested in their respective provinces. They promised to uphold the interests of their Muslim constituents against the All India Hindu majority. Against the All India Hindu majority. Further, they also promised to protect Muslim businessmen and landlords against the Congress's radical workers movement. Against the Congress's radical workers movement. Right? These were the regional parties. Left parties. Likho. The communists. That is the Communist Party of India. Did not participate. Why? not because they did not want to, but because they were not allowed to, did not participate, as the center had banned them, right? The central government had put a ban on the Communist Party of India. Therefore, they were not allowed to participate. This did not mean that there was no space for the left within these elections. In fact, by this point of time, the leftist movement had grown beyond the bounds of the CPI. In fact, even within the Congress party, a strong left wing had emerged. That is the Congress Socialist Party. The Congress Socialist Party, which had been formed in 1934. Write down. Congress Socialist Party, established in 1934, had emerged as a major influence within the Congress, had emerged as a major influence within the Congress. Now, they had been the most vocal within the Congress in their opposition to participating in the elections as well as accepting office, right? They had most vocally opposed the Congress's participation in the election and office acceptance during the strategic debate, right? So the strategic debate that had taken place following the withdrawal of the civil disobedience movement had witnessed unanimous opposition from the Congress Socialist Party on the questions of participation in the elections as well as accepting offices following the elections, right? Next up point likho. Instead, they wanted the Congress to launch a new mass movement with the support of workers and peasants, right? But both the Gandhians and the constitutionalists wanted to avoid this. The constitutionalists primarily because they were sympathizers of the right wing. They consisted of leaders such as C. Rajgopalachari, Dr. Rajendra Prasad, or Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, etc. Gandhians because they wanted to avoid an open rift between the upper classes and the lower classes. They did not want to begin a class struggle within the national movement. Right? Write down. However, they were defeated by the alliance of constitutionalists and Gandhians. Right? As a result, in the Faizpur session of 1936, the members of the Congress Socialist Party and other leftist leaders within the Congress, including the then president of the Congress, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, had given their approval for the strategy of contesting the elections and entering office. Write down. Therefore, at the Faizpur session 1936, it was decided that the Congress would take part in the elections. Would take part in the elections, right? And जो ये कांग्रेस के मैनिफेस्टो का रैडिकल वर्कर्स एजेंडा है, इंक्लूडिंग promises such as the abolition of zamindari, bringing about radical tenancy reforms, providing debt relief to indebted peasants, introducing reforms in the money lending business. That means the regulation of money lenders, the reduction of interest, the writing off of loans, etc., upliftment of Harijans and women, bringing about radical workers' reforms, releasing political prisoners, and ending the use of the police in order to run the government, in order to administer the people. ये जो radical agenda है, that was because of the left-leaning groups within the Congress, right? So, although the socialists had been defeated in their opposition to participation in the elections and to entering office, but much of the Congress's achievements during its 28-month rule following these provincial elections was because of the influence of the socialists. Next point. The socialists then changed their strategy. And worked to bring the Congress closer to workers and peasants. Closer to workers and peasants, right? Now, it was because of the ability of the socialists to attract the workers and peasants that the Congress performed extremely well, right? So, the Congress owed a lot to the socialists with regards to its election, you can say, performance, right? And thus, when the Congress was in a position to form ministries, the socialists were given important portfolios in these ministries. For example, many of the Kisan Sabha leaders became agricultural ministers in the provincial governments. Many of the trade union leaders became the labor ministers in the provincial governments, right? And thus, the socialists were able to align the Congress's ministries with the workers and peasants movements, at least to a certain degree. After elections, the socialists worked to fulfill the strongest working class demands within the framework of legal authority. Okay? So these were the various parties, groups, ideologies, and leaders who participated in the 1937 provincial elections. Next लिखो results. Number 1, the Congress secured a clear majority in 5 out of the 6 Hindu majority provinces. That means all the Hindu majority provinces except Bombay. Right? And in these 5 Hindu majority provinces, the Congress was able to create a majority government. Number 2, the Congress also emerged as the single largest party in Bombay. And formed a coalition government. With the help of smaller parties. With the help of smaller parties. The point लिखो. Dr. Ambedkar's party performed well, winning 11 out of the 17 seats assigned as separate electorates for Dalits. Winning 11 out of the 17 seats assigned as separate electorates for Dalits. Next लिखो. Number 3. The Congress also emerged as the single largest party in Assam and most surprisingly NWFP and most surprisingly NWFP, which had an overwhelming Muslim majority. नेक्स्ट लिखो, here also the Congress formed coalition governments. Congress formed coalition governments. Number 4, in Punjab, Sindh and Bengal, the regional parties emerged as the leaders. Full stop. Jinnah entered a pact with these local parties and the Muslim League formed the government as the junior coalition partner. Formed the governments as the junior coalition partners. ठीक है? But by the end of 1937, the Muslim League was able to co-opt these regional parties and they functioned as proxies of Jinnah. ठीक है? Next subpoint. Gradually, the regional parties of these provinces were co-opted by Jinnah and emerged as Muslim League proxies. ठीक है? Number 5. The 1937 elections represented an electoral disaster for the Muslim League. Represented an electoral disaster for the Muslim League. Full stop. They performed poorly across the country and even in separate electorate and reserved constituencies for Muslims. And even in separate electorate and reserved constituencies for Muslims. Full stop. This weakened the legitimacy of the Muslim League. As the leader of Indian Muslims. ठीक है? So these were the election results of 1937. Next point लिखो. Significance and controversy. Next subheading, significance and controversy. Right? So first we will address the controversy, and then we shall talk about the significance of these 1937 elections and their results. Now, the election became controversial in the context of the elections in the United Provinces. Over here, Jinnah and Nehru had formed an informal pact. It had been agreed that the Congress is going to contest from some constituencies, while the Muslim League is going to contest from others. Therefore, neither party is going to cut the votes of the other candidate, right? Now, Jinnah had been insisting that the Congress should not participate from any of the separate electorate constituencies, especially those which had been reserved for Muslims. Now, he wanted that only the Muslim League should field candidates in the separate electorate constituencies. He argued that since the Congress was morally opposed to separate electorates, it should not field any candidates. But the Congress felt that Jinnah was using the separate electorates as a means to secure a prominent voice in the state legislative assemblies, and they did not want to allow him a free hand. Therefore, Nehru, as part of this pact, insisted upon the division of even the separate electorate constituencies among the Congress and Muslim leagues equally. Finally, the pact was signed. Now, the Congress performed extremely well and secured a clear majority, while the Muslim League was not able to gather momentum and failed miserably even in the Muslim reserved constituencies as well as the Muslim separate electorate constituencies. And this had weakened Jinnah's stance. Now, Jinnah kept on insisting that while the Congress had the right to form a ministry, but it should not have any Muslim ministers. All the ministers in the government, all the Muslim ministers in the government must come exclusively from the Muslim League. Now, this was not acceptable to Nehru, and as a result, this pact broke up, right? Now, the one-time coalition partners became mortal enemies, and Jinnah began a very radical propaganda program personally targeting Nehru as well as the Congress. Now, this PR program, propaganda program, was highly communal, in which Jinnah berated Nehru for harming the interests of Muslims and was trying to create or was fear-mongering among the Muslims that Muslims and their interests both are in danger under Hindu-dominated Congress rule. And thus, the Muslims must strike a separate path. They should join the Muslim League and support it wholeheartedly. He tried to convince the Muslims of UP that it was only the Muslim League that was in a position to protect their crucial interests. Now, this highly communalized propaganda program proved to be quite successful. And within a few months, within a period of 3 months, in UP alone, the Muslim League gathered a total of more than 1 lakh supporters, right? This was a very radical transformation for a party which historically, since its inception, had only had a membership of 6,000 members, right? So 1906 से लेकर के 1937 तक सारे members को भी जोड़ लो तो number was less than 6,000, and suddenly within a matter of 3 months, following charged campaigning by Jinnah, the Muslim League had gathered more than 1 lakh members in UP alone. And from UP, this fire continued to spread. Now, it is going to be reflected in Jinnah's pact with the regional parties. Now, these regional parties, since they had become proxies of the Muslim League and thus working as puppet governments of Jinnah, they began a radical campaign for suppressing all opposition. Their first target was, of course, the Congress, but also the leftists, also the socialists and communists, right? So they, in fact, used the state apparatus, including the police, the British laws, courts, in order to suppress the homegrown organic socialist as well as Congress leaders and movements, right? So that is why it became quite controversial. Uh, Overall, the significance of the 1937 elections was that it legitimized the Congress as the largest political party of India. It was a huge blow to the British, who had been trying to create an or a parity between the Congress and other political parties. Right? The British had tried to do this in the context of the Round Table Conference also, where all the political parties and their opinions had been given equal weightage. However, this parity was shown to be non-existent at the ground level, and people entrusted the Congress even after the withdrawal of the let us say civil disobedience movement to lead them to a brighter future. Right. Thirdly, the election manifesto of the Congress, which proved to be successful in the end, was heavily influenced by socialist ideology. So it also gave legitimacy to the growing socialist movement. Right? And this is going to be reflected both within the government and outside the government. Within the government, the Congress worked to fulfill its electoral promises to the working class, and outside the government, developments within the Congress would also shadow the growing strength of the socialist movement. Subhash Chandra Bose, by this time a committed and firebrand socialist, was elected twice as Congress president in the Haripura and Tripuri Congress sessions. He also spearheaded the formation of the National Planning Committee to begin the process of economic planning. Right? So the movement as a whole shifted towards the left, and this position was legitimized by the election results. Further, the inclusive agenda of the Congress, which was working within the framework of an all India perspective or all India framework, proved to be more effective than the divisive attitude and politics of the other parties, right? So the people had responded to it, and thus the masses had come out in support of a free, united, progressive, and socialist India. Okay? So the Congress's position, its strategy and methods, they were also legitimized by the elections. However, the elections also exposed the cracks present in the Indian national movement. Right? Kaise? See, the Congress's program was an inclusive one, but it involved the, let us say, adjustment of opposing political interests with each other, right? Now, these included the ideological opposition between zamindars, and money lenders against the peasants, between the industrialists or capitalists against the workers, between the right-wing Congress leaders such as C. Rajgopalachari, Sardar Patel, Dr. Rajendra Prasad, versus the left-leaning Congress leaders including figures such as Yusuf Mehrali, Jay Prakash Narayan, or even Subhash Chandra Bose and Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, right? Now, while they had forgotten their differences for the time being in order to secure a massive electoral victory, however, as soon as the Congress was in a position to form governments in the provinces, this conflict emerged once again. The two groups began to push and pull in order to secure more ministerial positions for their champions and to set the Congress's agenda for its governance period, right? So, to what extent would peasant and workers' demand be accepted? To what extent reforms are going to be initiated? How much would the zamindars, moneylenders, and industrialists have to lose? Now, initially, the Congress came under the strong influence of this group, the left-wing group, and this alienated the zamindars and moneylenders. But then the right-wing leaders pushed back. The right-wing leaders such as K.M. Munshi, C. Gopalachari, etc., they in fact emerged as chief ministers in Bombay and this uh, Madras, respectively, and they now try to win back the support of the zamindars, moneylenders, and industrialists by diluting the reforms that had been initiated by the left-wing leaders. And this is going to result in the emergence of two groups within the government who are going to push and pull against each other to secure their own group interests, right? In the end, the Congress is going to create disaffection among both groups. The peasants finally are going to be frustrated with the Congress and workers for not introducing radical enough reforms, while the zamindars, moneylenders, and industrialists would be unhappy with the Congress for introducing, in their eyes, what were radical reforms and harming the interests of the landed community, of the capitalist class, of the business groups. And because of this, the Congress is going to lose some of its former sheen. Okay? And this would expose the cracks present in the Indian national movement. It would prove to be extremely disastrous, especially in the final stages of the national movement. It was because of this division, partly because of this division, that the Muslim League was able to win the support of some of these disaffected groups, right? And why the Pakistan movement became so popular and powerful, especially in the Muslim-dominated, Muslim-majority regions and provinces, right? So this would prove to be a big setback for the Congress in the end, right? So give the next subheading: significance and controversy. Write down number 1. The elections became controversial. The elections became controversial in the context of the UP Legislative Assembly. In the context of the UP Legislative Assembly. Full stop. The Congress and Muslim League had formed a pre-poll alliance, pre-election alliance, a pre-poll alliance, in accordance with which they had divided the electoral constituencies among themselves. Full stop. Sub point. However, tension was present from the very beginning. As Nehru had rejected Jinnah's proposal that the Muslim League should have exclusive rights to field candidates in constituencies reserved for Muslims. In constituencies reserved for Muslims. ठीक है? Next main point लिखो. The election results were a disaster for the Muslim League. Full stop. It performed exceptionally poorly while the Congress performed exceptionally well. Full stop. Jinnah tried to convince Nehru that the Congress should not appoint any Muslim ministers, claiming that the Muslim League had the exclusive right to do so. Claiming that the Muslim League had the exclusive right to do so. Sub point likho. However, Pandit Nehru refused for the following reasons. A and B. A. The Congress was morally opposed. To this proposal, as it would have weakened its secular position and made it an exclusively Hindu party. Full stop. Same sub point mein. Simultaneously, it would have legitimized the Muslim League as the exclusive representative of Indian Muslims. Simultaneously, it would have legitimized the Muslim League as the exclusive representative of Indian Muslims. ठीक है? And B लिखो. Next sub point. B. The Congress no longer needed the Muslim League's support to form a government. Full stop. It had secured a comfortable majority It had secured a comfortable majority. Right? So one on moral grounds, second on practical grounds. Muslim League की अब जरूरत ही नहीं थी. So why to keep agreeing with Muhammad Ali Jinnah and his divisive campaign? Therefore, Nehru rejected this proposal outright. Next main point. Jinnah accused the Congress of violating the alliance or violating the pact and began a poisonous campaign targeting the Congress and personally attacking Nehru. Sub point लिखो. He addressed a series of mass rallies. Across the Muslim-dominated regions of UP. He addressed a series of mass rallies across the Muslim-dominated regions of UP. Full stop. In his communally charged speeches, he engaged in fear mongering. Full stop. He told the Muslim masses that Islam is in danger. Under the Hindu-dominated Congress rule. He told the Muslim masses that Islam is in danger under the Hindu-dominated Congress rule. Right? And this was a major departure from the earlier slogan that Muslim interests are threatened by Hindu majoritarian rule. Right? Neither was the Congress targeted directly, nor was the religion of Islam itself evoked as being in danger. Right? अब क्या slogan हो गया? That Congress dominated or Hindu dominated Congress rule में not Muslim interests but Muslims and Islam itself is in danger. So he told the Muslim masses that Islam is in danger under the Hindu dominated Congress rule. Full stop. Next main point. His lightning campaign proved extremely effective. Full stop. Sub point. Within a period of 3 months, comma, Jinnah was able to enlist roughly 1 lakh new Muslim League members. 1 lakh new Muslim League members in UP alone. In UP alone. Full stop. Next subpoint. The same pattern was repeated across India, and was highly successful, especially in the Muslim majority provinces of Western and Eastern India. Especially in the Muslim majority provinces of Western and Eastern India. Right? Next main point. Jinnah's new radicalism against the Congress. Jinnah's new radicalism against the Congress was also evident in the functioning of the provincial governments, of Punjab, Sindh and Bengal. The functioning of the provincial governments of Punjab, Sindh and Bengal. Full stop. The point. The Muslim League's coalition governments in these provinces, actively used the colonial police and security apparatus. The colonial police and security apparatus to suppress the Congress, socialists and Hindu right-wing politicians alike. To suppress the Congress, socialists and Hindu right-wing politicians alike. Full stop. The point. A visible rift began emerging in the two halves of India. Foretelling the painful future. So in a matter of 10 years, the company would be torn into two, and the lines along which it would be torn would be the same ones established by the 1937 provincial elections. Following the controversy regarding the UP election, the Muslim League had emerged as a mass movement unto itself and ultimately raised the Pakistani demand, and the result was partition, right? So foretelling the painful future. So that is the controversy and one of the important significances of the 1937 elections. Next main point likho. The number 2, the election results legitimized the Congress as the most popular party in the whole of India. Full stop. Subpoint. These elections also shattered the artificial parity between the Congress and other political parties that had been manufactured by the government to deliberately weaken the Congress's movement. Full stop. The masses had responded positively. To the Congress's inclusive and progressive agenda. While rejecting the divisive politics of caste, religion, and language. Full stop. In other words, the masses had voted for a free and progressive India, a free, progressive and united India. Okay? This was a major blow to the morale of the British rule, because the people had clearly chosen a free, united and progressive India instead of an India that would continue to be ruled by a colonial government. Okay? Next main point, number 3. The 1937 election results were also a huge step forward in the emerging socialist movement in Indian politics. Full stop. Subpoint. The masses had supported the left-leaning agenda of the Congress. And the Congress had benefited greatly in the form of major victories. Next point. The growing leftward shift was reflected both within and outside, both within and outside the institutional framework, the institutional framework of the Congress ministries, both within and outside the institutional framework of the Congress ministries. Next point. Many Kisan Sabha leaders became agriculture ministers in the provincial governments, while many trade union leaders were appointed as labor ministers. Next point. In order to fulfill its electoral promises, comma, the provincial governments of several Congress governed states introduced policies to address the demands of the working classes. Next point. Subhash Chandra Bose, comma, possibly the most vocal left-leaning Congress leader was elected as Congress president twice. 1938 and 39. Tripura and Haripura Congress sessions, right? 1938-39 was elected as Congress president twice, and set up the National Planning Committee, within brackets 1938, to begin the task of economic planning. Okay? So there was a visible leftward shift in the Congress as well as the national movement, and this position had been legitimized by the 1937 elections. Number 4. The masses had voted in favor of the inclusive all India framework, of the Congress. They had come out in support of a free, united, progressive, and socialist India. They had come out in support of a free, united, progressive, and socialist India. Full stop. The Congress would have to, the Congress would have to fulfill its promises, fulfill its promises, and commit itself, and commit itself to the electoral agenda, to the electoral agenda that had seen, that had seen its electoral success, or that had led to its electoral success, that had led to its electoral success. Okay? So the Congress would find it very tough to move back from this agenda, to dilute this agenda without losing popularity, without losing support, right? And in the future, the Congress is going to shift even deeper into this agenda, into this all India framework for a free, united, progressive, and socialist India. Write down next point. In the future, comma, the Congress would continue. In the future, the Congress would continue to push forward, this agenda even more strongly, right? And lastly, number 5. However, the 1937 elections also exposed the dangerous cracks present within the national movement. Full stop. Now, one of these cracks, right, that is the division between the right wing and left wing, that would evolve as the Congress ministries performed the task of administration, but the other one appeared immediately following the election. That is the crack between the Congress and Muslim League. Write down subpoint. One of these cracks appeared immediately. One of these cracks appeared immediately. Full stop. The Congress and Muslim League parted ways following the controversy associated with the UP assembly elections. Next point. The other crack, that is between the Congress right and left wings, that is the divide between the Congress right and left wing, developed gradually as a result of the constant friction between these two ideological opponents, within the framework of legal authority, Full stop. Next point. In the end, the Congress was not able to fully satisfy either group, resulting in the erosion of popular support in both camps. Resulting in the erosion of popular support in both camps. Full stop. Next point. The alienated sections moved towards the Muslim League and its highly communalized agenda. Full stop. The Congress learned the bitter lesson that campaigning and governing are two radically different tasks. Full stop. It came face to face with the practical obstacles of administration. And came face to face with the practical obstacles of administration and found itself wanting. That means it was not able to entirely overcome these obstacles, right? And found itself wanting, right? And it is because of this inability to overcome these practical obstacles that it ended up alienating part of both these two ideological groups. And those who were alienated came primarily from the Muslim community, who now had a new emerging alternative, that is the Muslim League. So they would give their support to the Muslim League and its future Pakistan demand. Okay? So this was the controversy and significance of the 1937 elections. Right. Now, as indicated earlier, the Congress was able to form governments in 8 out of the 11 British Indian provinces. In 5, it had a majority government, and in the other 3, it had a coalition government. And they continued to govern for a total of 2 years and 4 months, that is 28 months. So the next heading you should give 28 months of Congress rule. 28 months of Congress rule. Now, what do we have to look at over here? Firstly, the achievements of the Congress, the works that they undertook, and secondly, the critical evaluation of the achievements and works performed by the Congress in its 28-month rule in the 8 provinces. Okay? So, first of all, write down the Congress was able to form governments in 8 out of the 11 British Indian provinces. In 8 out of the 11 British Indian provinces, namely UP, Bihar, CP, Odisha, Madras, Bombay, Assam, and NWFP. Assam and NWFP. Full stop. Next point. In these provinces, comma, the Congress introduced a series of policies to fulfill its promises made to the people during the election campaign. Fulfill its promises made to the people in the election campaign. Right? So we are going to classify the policies with regards to various spheres, right? For example, in the political sphere, some reforms were necessary. In the field of agriculture, some reforms were necessary. In the field of industry, some reforms were necessary. The Congress had also promised to fulfill some important social objectives. So we can divide them into political, agricultural, industrial, and social work or social reforms. Right? So write down these policies fall under the Congress's political, agricultural, industrial, and social programs. These policies fall under the Congress's political, agricultural, industrial, and social program. Right. Now, first of all, political reforms. Give the subheading political reforms. Write down. Emergency powers. Acquired by the provincial governments. Through the Public Safety Act So the Public Safety Act 1929 were repealed. Now, this was one of the acts that was being discussed in the Central Legislative Assembly, along with the Trade Disputes Bill that Bhagat Singh and Batukeshwar Dutt had opposed, and they had done it in a very spectacular manner by bombing the Central Legislative Assembly, right? So the emergency powers acquired by the provincial governments through the Public Safety Act of 1929 were repealed. Next, likho. The bans on political organizations such as the Hindustan Seva Dal, and the Youth League were also lifted. The bans on political organizations such as the Hindustan Seva Dal and the Youth League were also lifted, right? However, the Congress was helpless in lifting the ban on communists because that ban had not been imposed by the provincial governments. It had rather been imposed by the central government. ठीक है? तो इसी में सब point लिख सकते हो. However, the ban on the communists remained in place since it had been imposed by the central government and could be lifted only by it. Next, all restrictions on the press were removed. Right? For example, the securities that had been deposited by the publishers of all the newspapers as a guarantee against printing anything that was in opposition of the British rule and the colonial policy, etc., they were returned. Further, the blacklisting of certain newspapers from government advertisements. So the government has always been a big advertiser, and one way in which it would punish some of the hostile newspapers was to not give any advertisements to them, right? And so this blacklisting policy, that was also removed. Sub points में लिख सकते हो. Securities taken from the publishers were returned, and the policy of blacklisting hostile publications from government advertisements. The policy of blacklisting hostile publications from government advertisement was lifted. Next, repealed arms licenses were restored, and confiscated arms were returned. And confiscated arms were returned. ठीक है? Next, police powers were curbed. Police powers were curbed. The point. Political prisoners were freed, and detainees were liberated. Full stop. So detainees were those people who had been detained by the police under the preventive detention laws, and they had not even been placed in front of a magistrate. Neither were they going to be tried. So the police was indefinitely holding them and releasing them as per their will. Now, this was a major blow to civil liberties, to individual liberty, the right to freedom, right to life, and thus the Congress governments liberated all these detainees, including the political prisoners and other even under trials, right? So political prisoners were released and detainees were liberated. Further, next point, further, the Congress ministries ended the policy of shadowing of political leaders or opposition by the CID, the Central Investigative Division, right? So the British were using their police apparatus and especially their secret police, the Central Investigative Directorate, in order to follow the main political leaders, to follow the threatening movements that were emerging. And this was being used by the state in order to suppress their activities. Now, this policy was also ended, right? Next, the Congress ministries, also worked to restore the properties confiscated during the civil disobedience movement. Restore the properties confiscated during the civil disobedience movement. Full stop. Subpoint. Further, the pensions of government officials, who had sympathized with the civil disobedience movement, were also restored. So the government had suspended these pensions in order to punish these officials and make an example out of them, right? So this was also restored. Okay. Now, while the Congress was able to fulfill some of its political promises, it was not without blemish, not without any problems. It became problematic in the context of provinces such as Bombay and Madras, where the government was dominated by right-wing leaders, right? And they continued the old practice of shadowing their political opposition, that is, members of the Congress Socialist Party, the Communists, and even the Muslim League members. तो उनको अभी भी ये टारगेट करते रहे. Write down. However, the Congress's record with regards to civil liberties was not perfect. Full stop. The right-wing Congress government of Madras, led by C. Rajgopalachari, the right-wing Congress government of Madras, led by C. Rajgopalachari. So he was the premier or chief minister of Madras, led by C. Rajgopalachari, prosecuted socialist leaders such as Yusuf Meherli, he had made certain speeches in the Malabar region which were provocative in nature. They had some communal undertones as well as they were insightful with regards to class conflict. So this was an appeal to the Mopla peasants, right? And the specter of communal riots in the Malabar was raised once again, because of which Yusuf Meherli was arrested. He was tried and sentenced to 6 months of imprisonment. So, such as Yusuf Meherli and S.S. Batliwala and S.S. Batliwala. ठीक है. Next point लिखो. Much worse was the Bombay government. With K.M. Munshi as Home Minister. Full stop. It used the CID to shadow the communists and left-wing congressmen earning a public reprimand from the Congress High Command, right? So Pandit Nehru had taken him to task for such activities. That this was a colonial tool that was used to suppress Indian nationalists. How could a nationalist government continue to use the same tool to suppress other Indian nationalists? Okay? So much worse was the Bombay government with K.M. Munshi as minister, which used the CID to target communists and other leftist Congress leaders, okay, earning a public reprimand from Pandit Jawahar from the Congress High Command. Right. So these were the developments in the arena of political reforms. Next, agrarian reforms. Right. Now, what were the promises of the Congress? Abolition of zamindari, introduction of security of tenure, reducing the burden of land revenue and rent, regulation of money lending, and reduction of interest rates. Right? So these were the promises that were made. Now look, after coming to power, the Congress realized that the abolition of zamindari would not be possible. Why? Because zamindari was an institution that was entrenched within the Indian agriculture, and the Congress did not have sufficient opportunity, neither time nor the resources to abolish it completely without hurting the interests of the producer community. Secondly, it would also have resulted in a major breach emerging within the Congress, right? The right wing would have revolted completely, and that would have threatened an open class war. So the national movement would have been derailed, and the British ambition of creating this class divide that would have been successful. Thirdly, for abolishing zamindari, first of all, proper land records are necessary. They did not exist, right? And finally, for abolishing zamindari, the cooperation of the local officials was also crucial, and therefore, without them, it was not possible to abolish it, right? And therefore, the abolition of zamindari was delayed, was postponed कि अभी नहीं हो सकता है, बाद में करेंगे. And lastly, the Congress knew that the abolition of zamindari would take a long time, and this was something that the Congress did not have, right? From the very beginning, the Congress's agenda had been to make the 1935 Act unworkable, right? And since the governors had immense powers within the framework of the 1935 Act, the Congress knew that sooner rather than later, the provincial governors are going to dismiss the elected governments, and the task of zamindari abolition would not be fulfilled. इसमें एक और फैक्टर था that many of the small zamindars, they had actually supported the national movement, and it was only the larger zamindars who were still remaining loyal. So by abolishing zamindari, the Congress would have chopped off one of the roots of its popular support, that is the smaller zamindars. So they did not want to alienate that faction. So the task of zamindari abolition was not even attempted. When it came to tenancy reforms, some reforms were introduced in places such as Bihar, Bengal, Madras, etc. The reduction of land revenue and rent, that was also considered, but these reforms were not sufficient enough to satisfy the farming community. Now, when it comes to the security of tenure, इसमें एक होते हैं ऑक्यूपेंसी राइट्स, and the other is the problem of subtenancy. Right? Now, the big zamindars owned large estates from which they accumulated rent. Right? Now, these zamindars had divided their estates into smaller, more manageable portions, right? And they had been assigned to different tenants. So these were rich farmer families who were in charge of overseeing the task of agriculture in their particular territory, and they were also responsible for collecting rent from the actual farmer, right? Now, a portion of this rent they would keep for themselves as their share of the surplus. The rest they would give to the big zamindar. Now, within each of these were a large number of farmer families, right? Now, these were the people who were actually living on and working on the land. Now, while the new acts introduced by the Congress governments recognize the occupancy rights of these tenants, these large farmer families, they did nothing to recognize the rights of these smaller peasants, the actual tillers of the land. So, जो सब tenancy का issue था, that could not be, let us say, targeted, right? And finally, we have the issue of regulation of money lending, right? Now, obviously, this kind of a policy would have invited opposition from the money lenders themselves. But there was another very influential group which came out against such activities, such as, and these were the lawyers. So why were lawyers opposing the regulation of money lending businesses? Because money lending and the debt industry was one of the major sources of litigation, right? So the money lenders used to take all their debtors to the court, and the lawyers were getting employment in large numbers from these cases. Now, if money lending was brought under government regulation, and if the burden of interests was reduced, then the lawyers would lose a major source of their income. So that is why they opposed it. Reduction of land revenue and rent, that also remained problematic. Firstly, because it required the cooperation of the central government that was not going to cooperate. And secondly, because it would have alienated the large and small zamindars alike. So while it was attempted, it was an abortive process, right? So no real developments were able to take place. So agrarian reforms में जो progress है, ऐसा नहीं है कि नहीं हुआ बिल्कुल भी, but it was abortive and it was not sufficient enough to satisfy the farmers who had supported the Congress. So it alienated the leftist groups. While at the same time, because the Congress had initiated these reforms and were able to affect them in small measure, in limited measure, because of this, it also alienated a section of the zamindar and moneylender class. Okay? So in the end, the Congress ended up losing popularity over these reforms. Right? Now, agrarian reforms, industrial reforms, and social reforms, we are going to take the notes in tomorrow's class. Right? I am ending this lecture right now, and इसको आगे कंटिन्यू करते हैं कल की क्लास में.